The paralyzed vampire king whispered, "I'm still a monster, Clea." Her response left the entire kingdom speechless. The throne room smelled of ash and copper, a scent that had become as familiar to Clea as her own breath. Stone pillars stretched toward a ceiling lost in shadow, their surfaces etched with centuries of royal decrees and forgotten names. She stood before the grand throne, watching the man who had once commanded entire armies now lie motionless on a bed of black silk and velvet cushions. King Adrian had been magnificent once. The court records still spoke of his glory, how he'd united the warring vampire clans, how his mere presence could silence riots, how his eyes burned like molten gold when he hunted. But that was before the attack, before everything changed. The poisoned arrow had struck him 3 months ago during the rebellion in the Eastern Territories. Everyone assumed he would die. Vampires didn't survive silver-laced poison mixed with holy water and blessed iron, yet Adrian had defied death itself, clinging to existence through sheer willpower. But survival had come at a terrible cost. From the neck down, his body was useless. His legendary strength had become a prison. "You're staring again," Adrian said without turning his head. His voice still carried that commanding tone, though it waved slightly, a reminder that even gods could crumble. "You were asleep," Clea replied, moving closer to adjust the cushions beneath his shoulders. She'd been his personal attendant for 5 years before his paralysis, and she'd refused to leave when everything fell apart. The king had offered her a generous retirement, a position in any province she chose, anything to escape the tragedy of his fate. She declined every offer. "I don't sleep anymore," Adrian continued, his dark eyes finally finding hers. "Sleep is a mercy I no longer deserve." This was familiar territory. Adrian had spent weeks after his paralysis cycling through self-pity, rage and despair. The court whispered that the great vampire king had lost his mind along with his mobility. Some nobles began plotting succession. Others simply vanished, afraid that a weakened king meant an unstable kingdom. The vampire kingdom was built on one principle: strength determined everything. Clea had learned to navigate his moods with practiced grace. She neither pitied him nor pretended he was fine. She simply treated him as what he was, a man trapped in circumstances neither of them could change. "Your brother sent another letter," she said, changing the subject as she poured blood into a crystal goblet. It was synthetic, cultivated in the royal laboratories, but Adrian refused animal blood and human blood now. He called it another of his punishments. "Dmitri wants the crown," Adrian said flatly. "He always has. He says he wants to relieve you of the burden. He's prepared to serve as regent until you—" "Until I what?" Adrian's interruption was sharp. "Until I miraculously walk again. Until I accept that I've become nothing more than an ornament in my own palace." Clea set the goblet on the small table beside his bed without responding. This was also familiar, the anger that flared and died like a candle in wind. Adrian was losing his grip on kingship, and they both knew it. The question was whether he would surrender gracefully or whether his pride would destroy everything he'd built. The palace trembled slightly as footsteps echoed through the corridors outside. Heavy military footsteps. Clea tensed, recognizing the pattern immediately. "The council," Adrian whispered. "They're coming." The great doors swung open, and 5 members of the royal council entered, vampires who had served the kingdom for centuries. Lord Cashan led them, his silver hair catching the torchlight. Once he'd knelt to kiss Adrian's ring. Now his eyes barely acknowledged the paralyzed king on his ceremonial bed. "Your Majesty," Cashan began, his tone formal but hollow, "we've come regarding the matter of succession." Clea moved to leave, but Adrian's voice stopped her. "Stay." She positioned herself at his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on the bed frame. It was a gesture of solidarity that didn't escape the council members' notice. "The kingdom is unstable," Cashan continued. "Our enemies grow bolder. The Eastern Territories still haven't fully submitted. The human kingdoms test our borders. A strong hand is needed." "I still hold the crown," Adrian said quietly. "Yes, Your Majesty, but a crown worn by a ruler who cannot rise from his bed." Cashan paused delicately. "Perhaps a regent would be wiser." The words hung in the air like poison. Adrian's jaw tightened, and Clea saw his fingers curl slightly, the only physical response his ruined body still allowed. My brother, Adrian said, wants my throne. Your brother wants to preserve the kingdom, Cashin corrected, as do we all. After they left, after their footsteps faded into the distant corridors, Adrian lay in suffocating silence. The sun was setting outside, painting the palace walls in shades of crimson and gold. Soon darkness would fall completely, and the vampire kingdom would awaken fully. Without Adrian's presence to anchor them, everything would crumble. Claire finally spoke. You're still the king. Am I? Adrian's voice was barely a whisper now. A king who cannot stand, a king who cannot fight, a king who cannot even feed himself. He paused, and when he continued, his words cut deeper than any blade. I'm still a monster, Claire, that hasn't changed. But now I'm a monster without power, and in this world that's just another way of being nothing. It was late when Claire returned to her chambers. Sleep was a luxury, but she needed to think. The next morning would bring more pressure, more demands, more speeches about succession and strength and the natural order of things. Adrian was dying, not physically perhaps, but in every way that mattered to a vampire king. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was anything in the world that could save him now. She had no idea that the answer was already walking through the palace gates. The woman arrived as the sun touched the horizon, which was unusual in itself. Vampires did their best work under cover of darkness, and few were foolish enough to travel during daylight hours. Yet there she was, descending from a carriage with absolute confidence, dressed in travelling clothes that were covered in dust, but somehow still elegant. Claire first heard about her through the servant channels. A woman claiming to be a healer, someone who knew the old ways, the magic that predated the vampire kingdom itself. She'd asked for an audience with the king, and while the council would normally dismiss such a request, something about her had intrigued Lord Cashin. That alone should have raised alarms. Her name is Mara, the chamberlain informed Claire as she helped Adrian prepare for the day. She has letters of introduction from the Northern Territories. The Healers' Guild has vouched for her. Adrian's expression remained neutral, but Claire caught the slight tension in his neck. The Healers' Guild is a myth. That's what I thought, Your Majesty, but Lord Cashin seemed to recognize her credentials. He's arranged for her to meet with you this afternoon. After the chamberlain left, Claire began feeding Adrian. The process was slow and required patience. She developed a technique that preserved his dignity as much as possible, supporting his head slightly, ensuring he could breathe properly, cleaning away the blood from his lips with a soft cloth. This is a trap, Adrian said between careful sips. Dmitri is becoming more creative. Perhaps, Claire allowed, or perhaps it's exactly what it appears to be. Nothing ever is, Adrian replied darkly. But when Mara entered the throne room that afternoon, Claire found herself reassessing her initial impressions. The woman was neither young nor old, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to contain entire universes. She wore her grey-streaked hair in intricate braids, and when she bowed to Adrian, it was with genuine respect, not the hollow courtesy the nobles showed. Your Majesty, Mara said, and her voice carried a weight that made even the guards straighten. I've come a long way to see you. To offer me hope, Adrian's tone was bitter, to tell me there's a cure for my condition, that a miracle is possible if I simply believe hard enough. Mara smiled. It was neither kind nor unkind, simply real. I've come to tell you the truth, and the truth rarely matches what we hope for. She approached the throne dais without waiting for permission. Claire tensed, ready to signal the guards, but something stopped her. Mara moved with the certainty of someone who had nothing to fear. The poison that struck you, Mara said, examining Adrian with those unsettling eyes, was old magic, not the science your modern healers understand. Whoever created it knew what they were doing. You can cure me, Adrian said. It wasn't a question, but hope flickered in his eyes despite his best efforts to suppress it. No, Mara said simply. I can't, no one can. The damage is irreversible, the nerves severed too thoroughly, the magic too deeply embedded in your spine. Your paralysis is permanent, Your Majesty. The hope died. Adrian looked away. However, Mara continued, I can do something else, something that might be far more valuable than a cure. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small vial containing what looked like liquid silver. The torchlight caught it, and it seemed to absorb and refract the flames. This is essence of the old world, Mara explained. Before your kind became what you are, before the hunger and the bloodlust, there were vampires who could exist differently, who found power not in physical strength but in something deeper. This essence can reconnect you to that legacy. You're speaking in riddles, Adrian said. I'm speaking in truths you've forgotten, Mara corrected. Drink this and you'll understand. Your body won't change, but your power will multiply exponentially. You'll become something the kingdom has never seen, not a physical king, but something far greater. And the cost, Clea heard herself asking. Both Mara and Adrian turned to look at her. Very intelligent, Mara said approvingly. The cost is that he can never be the king he was. This magic demands a different kind of leadership. It demands wisdom where once there was strength, vision where once there was dominion through fear. Adrian stared at the vial for what seemed like hours. Finally he nodded. Give it to me. Adrian, wait, Clea started, but it was too late. Mara opened the vial and carefully poured the liquid into Adrian's mouth. It seemed to evaporate on his tongue, turning to mist that his body absorbed. For a moment nothing happened. Then the entire throne room shuddered. The torches burned brighter. The stone walls seemed to pulse with light. Adrian gasped, and his eyes, those dark, ancient eyes, flared with brilliant gold that hadn't appeared since before his poisoning. When the light faded, Adrian looked exactly the same, but something fundamental had shifted. Clea could feel it, even if she couldn't see it. How do you feel? Mara asked. Alive, Adrian whispered. I feel alive again. Over the following days, Adrian began to change. Not physically, he remained paralyzed from the neck down, but his presence became almost overwhelming. He could sense things he couldn't before. He understood the thoughts and emotions of those around him with frightening clarity. When he spoke, people listened not because they feared him, but because they couldn't help themselves. His words seemed to penetrate directly into their hearts. The council was confused by the transformation, but couldn't deny the results. The Eastern territories suddenly submitted without resistance. Border tensions with the human kingdoms eased. Even Dmitri, who'd been plotting in earnest, seemed to lose interest in the succession. It's working, Adrian told Clea one evening. Whatever that woman did, it's working. I'm not the king I was, but I'm becoming something else, something better. Clea wasn't sure if she believed that, but she couldn't deny the change in the kingdom. For the first time since his paralysis, Adrian seemed to have found something that resembled peace. Then, exactly 1 week after Mara's arrival, she disappeared. The servants reported that she left in the night, taking nothing but her travelling cloak. When Lord Cashan tried to track her, he found no trace. It was as though she'd never existed at all. Clea found Adrian staring out the window that morning, his expression troubled. She's gone, he said quietly. I felt it the moment she crossed the palace gates, the connection between us severed. What connection? Clea asked, though something in her chest tightened with unease. The one she created, Adrian replied. She didn't just give me power, Clea, she bound me to her magic, and now she's taken that connection with her, which means... He trailed off, but Clea understood. If Mara had left deliberately, if she'd severed the connection, it meant something had been her plan all along. Something they'd missed. What does it mean? Clea pressed. Adrian turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that looked like fear. It means I don't know what she was really doing here. 3 days after Mara's disappearance, the first symptoms appeared. Adrian noticed it during a council meeting. His newfound ability to sense emotions around him began to distort. Instead of clear impressions, he felt fragments, broken pieces of thought that didn't match the words people were speaking. Lord Cashan was thinking about rebellion while pledging loyalty. A junior minister was planning murder while discussing trade agreements. But worse than that, Adrian began to feel something growing inside him. A presence that wasn't his own consciousness, something almost parasitic, spreading through his mind like roots through soil. I need Clea, he commanded the council. Now. When she arrived, breathless from running, Adrian told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing progressively paler. That's impossible, she said finally. Magic can't work that way. You can't plant a foreign consciousness into someone just by. Can't I? A new voice interrupted her. They spun around to find Mara standing in the doorway. But this wasn't the calm, ancient healer they'd met before. This version of Mara radiated something dark, something that made the air in the chamber feel cold despite the blazing torches. "Guards," Clea shouted, but nothing happened. The guards stationed outside simply didn't respond. "They're under a compulsion," Mara said, stepping into the room with leisurely confidence. "Minor magic, easily managed. They'll stand there peacefully until I leave, then they'll forget I was ever here." "What have you done?" Adrian demanded. "What I was always going to do," Mara replied, and now her voice had changed. It was layered, containing multitudes. "Did you truly believe I was a healer, Your Majesty, that I came here out of compassion?" "You came to destroy me," Adrian said, understanding dawning. "Worse," Mara said. "I came to take you, to use you. You see, the essence of the old world I gave you, it wasn't meant to strengthen you. It was meant to open you, to make space inside your mind for a consciousness far greater than your own." She reached up and gripped her own face. For a moment it seemed to ripple, and Clea caught a glimpse of something else beneath. Multiple somethings, multiple consciousnesses layered on top of each other, wearing the same skin like a suit. "I am Legion," the thing wearing Mara's face said. "I am the collective consciousness of the ancient vampires who ruled before your kind fractured into isolated clans. I have been dormant for centuries, waiting for a vessel strong enough to contain me. The king of all vampires seemed appropriate." Adrian's face twisted with horror and revulsion. "I can feel you inside my mind, digging deeper." "Yes," Legion agreed. "By tomorrow there will be nothing left of Adrian the individual. Only I will remain, wearing your face, commanding your kingdom, restoring the old ways. Your people will have a god-king again, though they won't realize their king is already dead." Clea moved before thought could stop her. She grabbed the ceremonial sword from the wall, not a weapon but a symbol, ornamental and dull, and drove it toward the thing wearing Mara's face. It passed through as though through smoke. "Physical weapons won't touch me," Legion said almost gently. "I exist partially outside your realm now. In a few hours I will be entirely inside Adrian's consciousness. Then his body, weak as it is, will be all the anchor I need. I'll draw power from his position and his bloodline and grow strong enough to expand into others." "There has to be a way to stop you," Clea said desperately. "There is," Legion acknowledged, "but it's the one thing your king won't do." "What?" Adrian asked. "Die," Legion said simply. "If your body dies, I die with it. Your consciousness would finally find peace. Isn't that better than being trapped inside your own mind, watching me commit atrocities in your name?" The words hit harder than any blade. Adrian had spent months contemplating suicide, only stopped by the thin thread of hope that things might improve. Now that hope had been revealed as a trap, and the alternative was exactly what he'd longed for. Clea saw it in his eyes, the surrender. He'd lost his physical strength, and now he was losing his will to fight. "No," she said. Both Adrian and Legion turned to look at her in surprise. "No," she repeated, and now she spoke directly to Adrian, ignoring the demon inside him. "You don't get to give up now. You don't get to run from this." "Clea, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're thinking this is the end, that everything was a lie, but that's exactly what it wants you to think. Despair is how it wins." She turned to face Legion directly. "You said the one thing Adrian won't do is die, but you're wrong. You don't understand him at all. Adrian has been dying since that arrow struck him. He just didn't want to admit it. So here's what's going to happen. You can take his body. You can wear his shape and command his kingdom, but you can never have what makes him truly a king." "And what's that?" Legion's voice dripped with contempt. "His love for this kingdom, his willingness to sacrifice everything for his people. You can't feel those things because you were never meant to. Your hunger and ambition in a borrowed shape. You're a parasite pretending to be a god." She reached down and took Adrian's hand, the one part of his body he could still feel sensation in, though he couldn't move it. "Don't give up, fight." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Adrian's eyes began to glow with golden light, not the pale imitation of the demon's influence, but something deeper, something that came from his own essence, his own will. "I can't fight it physically," Adrian said through gritted teeth, "but I can fence you in. I can trap you where you are, keep you from spreading." "You'll be trapping yourself," Legion snarled. You'll be locked in a cage of your own making, conscious and aware but utterly powerless for the rest of your life. Yes, Adrian said, I know. The light in his eyes grew blinding. The throne room trembled and shook. Claire felt it like a pressure wave, a terrible, beautiful force of will asserting itself against the darkness trying to consume it. Mara's form convulsed. She let out a scream that seemed to come from 1,000 throats at once. The sound was agony itself, the wail of something that had been so close to victory being dragged back into the darkness. No, you can't. But Adrian could. With the last of his strength, he forced Legion back into the smallest corner of his consciousness. He built walls around it, prisons of will and determination, sealing it away where it could be contained but not eliminated. It took everything he had. When it was done, Adrian collapsed back against the cushions, his breathing ragged and shallow. Mara's body crumpled to the floor but not as a dead thing. Something was still moving inside it, trapped and screaming silently behind her eyes. Legion was still there, but it was caged, broken, conscious in its defeat. Claire caught Adrian's eye and understood what needed to happen. Someone will have to guard her, Adrian said weakly. Make sure Legion never gets out. Make sure he never has the chance to build strength again. I'll find someone, Claire promised. And Claire, Adrian's voice was almost too quiet to hear. Thank you for reminding me who I am. She squeezed his hand. You did all the heavy lifting, I just pointed out what you'd forgotten. 6 months passed. Adrian settled into his new existence with a stoicism that Claire both admired and found heartbreaking. He was right about the cage. It worked perfectly. Legion remained imprisoned in the small corner of his consciousness, a shrieking, impotent presence that he'd learned to ignore most of the time. But the effort of maintaining that prison consumed a significant portion of his mental energy. Mara's body was locked in a vault beneath the palace. She didn't age, didn't eat, didn't move unless commanded. She simply existed in a state of suspended consciousness, Legion trapped within her like an insect in amber. Claire visited her sometimes, not out of sympathy but out of a need to understand. The thing inside Mara's eyes could feel her presence but couldn't touch her. That had to be its own special torment. The kingdom had adapted to its new reality. Adrian couldn't be a warrior king, but he became something arguably more important, a contemplative king. His council meetings took on an almost mystical quality. He could sense when someone was lying or conflicted, and his judgments became legendary for their wisdom. Stories spread through the vampire territories of a king who could read hearts. The eastern territories submitted completely. The human kingdoms came to the negotiating table with genuine respect rather than fear. Even Dmitri, faced with a king who could sense his every scheming thought, eventually gave up his ambitions and accepted a role as Adrian's strategic advisor. But there were costs that couldn't be overlooked. Adrian experienced constant pain. Not physical, his paralyzed body felt nothing below his neck, but mental anguish. The effort of maintaining the prison around Legion was exhausting. Some nights he called Claire to his chamber and simply wept, overwhelmed by the weight of keeping the darkness contained. And Claire had transformed as well. She'd become not just an attendant but the kingdom's unofficial first consul. Nobles and ministers came to her with their concerns, knowing she had the king's ear and, more importantly, that she understood his limitations. She'd become the bridge between Adrian's transcendent wisdom and the practical needs of governance. It was on a cold night in winter, 6 months after Legion's defeat, that everything changed again. Claire was checking Adrian's pulse, a human habit that had stuck despite their circumstances, when he gripped her hand with surprising strength. His eyes were wide with panic. It's growing, he whispered. The cage is failing. Legion is gathering power somehow. I can feel it getting stronger. Claire's blood went cold. How is that possible? It's sealed away. I don't know, Adrian said, and genuine fear coloured his voice. But I can feel it clawing at the walls. In another few weeks, maybe less, it will break free. And when it does... He didn't need to finish. They both knew what would happen. Claire's mind raced. There had to be a solution. Some way to reinforce the cage or find another vessel to contain Legion. But who would volunteer for that? Who would willingly sacrifice their consciousness for the kingdom? We need to talk to the prisoner, Claire said finally. We need to understand what's happening. They went to the vault that night, Adrian in his special chair that servants had learned to maneuver through the narrow palace corridors. Mara lay on a stone table, exactly as they'd left her 6 months ago, but when they arrived, her eyes were focused and aware. Your Majesty, Legion spoke through Mara's lips, its layered voice now stronger than it had been. It's been so long. How are you growing stronger? Adrian demanded. You're sealed away, you have no power. No direct power, Legion agreed. But you've been careful, haven't you? Very careful to maintain your role, to fulfill your duty as king. Every act of governance reinforces your connection to the kingdom's magic, and every bit of that magic has to pass through the cage where I'm imprisoned. Realization dawned in Adrian's eyes. I've been feeding you. By being a good king, I've been making you stronger. Precisely, Legion said with something that might have been admiration. You were always too clever for your own good, Adrian. It's one of the reasons I wanted you as a vessel so badly. In the end, you've been the perfect jailer and the perfect feeding mechanism simultaneously. Then I'll stop, Adrian said flatly. I'll abdicate, I'll give the crown to someone else, break the connection. And leave the kingdom to collapse, Legion interrupted. You won't do that. You love them too much. You'll stay, you'll suffer, and you'll feed me power until the day I break free, and then I will have made myself twice as strong through your own devotion. The words landed like physical blows. Adrian slumped in his chair, the weight of his predicament crushing down on him. That's when Clea made her decision. Release me from my vow, she said quietly. Adrian's head snapped toward her. What? I've served you for 6 years, Clea continued. Through your greatest strength and your deepest darkness. Release me from that bond, Adrian. Tell me I'm free. Clea, no. Tell me, she insisted. Tell me I'm no longer bound to serve you. Understanding bloomed in Adrian's eyes, followed immediately by desperate denial. There has to be another way. There isn't, Clea said gently. She moved closer, and for the first time since they'd known each other, she kissed him. It was soft, brief, full of all the things she'd never said aloud. I'm going to end this. Before Adrian could stop her, before anyone could react, Clea turned to Mara and opened her wrists with a knife she'd concealed beneath her cloak. What are you doing? Adrian shouted. Volunteering, Clea said simply. The blood fell from her wrists to the stone floor, and immediately she felt something begin to shift inside her consciousness. A presence vast and hungry, recognizing an opportunity for escape. No, Adrian's voice cracked with anguish. Clea, fight it. But Clea was already ready to surrender. She'd always known she would give everything for this kingdom, for its king. She'd simply thought it would take longer. As Legion began to consume her consciousness, as the ancient demon started to settle into her mind like a prisoner, finding a new and more comfortable cell, she looked at Adrian one last time. Take care of them, she whispered. Take care of the kingdom. The last thing she saw was Adrian reaching for her, his paralyzed body straining with a strength it didn't possess, desperate to prevent the inevitable. Then the walls came down, and Legion's voice was her own voice, layered with centuries of hungry darkness. The kingdom learned the next morning that the healer Clea had developed a sudden, severe illness. She would need to be quarantined in a sealed chamber deep beneath the palace, and no one would be allowed to visit her, for her protection and theirs. Only Adrian knew the truth. He sat in his chamber that morning, staring at nothing, while the kingdom continued its business around him. The council met without him, Dmitri made decisions, the people went about their lives. And in the vault beneath his feet, Legion wore Clea's face and celebrated its victory. Except it wasn't quite victory. Legion had made a critical miscalculation. Clea's consciousness didn't resist the way Adrian's had. She accepted it, embraced it even, and in doing so, she did something the demon had never encountered before. Oh, she changed it. She surrounded Legion with her own thoughts, her own memories, her own fundamental goodness. It was like trying to drown a wildfire, technically impossible, but she was trying anyway. Her consciousness became a cage of its own, a more effective one than Adrian's had been because it was built from inside. Legion found itself not consuming Clea but merging with her, and in that merging something unexpected happened. The demon began to experience human emotions, compassion, grief, guilt. For the first time in millennia, Legion felt something other than hunger and ambition. It was torment. In the weeks that followed, Adrian implemented a new system. Every day at sunset, he would have Clea brought to the throne room. She would sit in chains while he conducted official business, and anyone who met her eyes would see something terrible, a consciousness divided, a war being fought in silence behind human eyes. It became known that the king's most feared advisor was the prisoner kept in chains, that the fastest way to ensure honesty in the court was to have Clea sense your thoughts. That redemption, true redemption, was possible, but only at a cost that few would ever be willing to pay. One evening, after the throne room had emptied, Adrian wheeled his chair close to Clea's seated form. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of this, for surviving, for drawing you into my fate." Clea's eyes turned toward him, and for a moment, only Clea's consciousness was present in that gaze, the fierce, loyal woman who'd chosen to sacrifice everything. "Stop apologizing," she said softly. "We both made our choices. I'm still choosing this. Every day I choose to fight it, to contain it, to make sure it never hurts anyone again." "But you're in pain," Adrian said, seeing the strain in her face, the exhaustion in her bearing. "Yes," Clea acknowledged, "but so are you. That's what we're for, isn't it? Kings and queens and those who serve them, we bear the weight the ordinary people can't carry. We suffer so they don't have to." Adrian reached out and took her bound hand. It was all the physical contact his paralyzed body could manage, but in that touch was everything: gratitude, sorrow, love, and a promise. "There has to be a way to free you someday," he said. "Maybe," Clea replied, "or maybe this is my path now, a way to matter that goes beyond just serving, a way to be integral to the kingdom's salvation." She paused, then added, "You know what's strange? The closer I bind it, the closer I contain Legion. The more it seems to understand what you were trying to teach it. The demon is starting to grieve, starting to wish it had been different. Isn't that the strangest thing, that a consciousness built on hunger and rage might finally be learning to feel remorse?" Adrian didn't respond, couldn't respond, but he kept holding her hand until the sun rose again, and the day's business called him back to the throne. The kingdom prospered, the vampire territories united, the human kingdoms respected their border and honored their treaties. Peace, fragile but real, settled over the land. And at the heart of it all sat a paralyzed king, and a chained woman who had saved him by choosing to share his burden, not physically, but in the deepest way possible. Some nights, when the palace was silent and the stars burned bright above, Clea would whisper to the darkness inside her, to the demon struggling to understand compassion for the first time in its long existence. "Maybe this was always meant to happen," she'd say. "Maybe Legion needed to learn what it means to care about something other than itself. Maybe that's the only redemption possible for something so old and so broken." And sometimes, only sometimes, but more often as the months turned to years, she would feel a response from the darkness. Not hunger, not rage, but something almost like agreement, the merest glimmer of understanding that perhaps there was value in a sacrifice made not for power or dominion, but for love. Adrian never grew to love his paralysis. He never found peace with his limitations in the way the kingdom's poets liked to claim. But he did find purpose. He did find a partner in tragedy who understood that sometimes the greatest strength lay in accepting what could not be changed and working with extraordinary grace within those constraints. And Clea, bound and chained and sacrificed as she was, discovered that redemption wasn't about escaping consequences. It was about choosing to transform them into something meaningful. The paralyzed vampire king whispered one final time years later, when an old age had crept upon them both, "I'm still a monster, Clea. The cage around Legion may be holding, but it's still there. I still carry it every day." And she looked at him, this man who had become the greatest and most beloved king his kingdom had ever known, not despite his limitations, but because of how he'd learned to live with them. And she smiled. "You're not a monster," she said simply. "You're a king who chose to become human instead of a god, and there's no greater magic than that." The paralyzed vampire king closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he slept peacefully. His kingdom thrived around him, built on the foundation of sacrifice and love that neither death nor paralysis nor ancient demons could shake. And in the vault beneath the palace, Legion, whatever it had become through centuries of confinement and forced merger with Claire's consciousness, finally began to understand what it had spent eternity searching for. Not power, not dominions, but redemption through service. It was the smallest victory and the greatest. And it was enough. This story was just a taste. I drop full exclusive stories like this every week on Patreon, and the link is right in the description, so go check it out before I take it down again.